Those are a number of the physical changes that happen. And now we're going to look at some of the areas where older adults actually enact, and have to deal with this variety of cognitive and physical change and decline, and how that manifests. So, driving and community mobility are huge for adults, right? Driving is an important part of well being, and it's central to a person's autonomy and independence. When older adults need to give up driving because it represents a safety issue, it limits their access to the community. It can lead to depression, isolation, decreased participation in meaningful activities, and a decreased ability to care for oneself and feel well. There's a number of safety concerns that are associated with older adults and driving. And some of these include limited vision, slow reaction time, and decreased mobility and coordination. Behavioral factors also play a role. So poor judgment of what to do in a crucial situation, and all of the sophisticated decisions that we make when we drive that we don't really think about can be turned into safety issues for the older adult. Also, drifting mentally. Obviously, drifting on the road as well, but drifting mentally, and decreased behavior changes. So this is the ability to change one's behavior in response to an unexpected or rapidly changing situation, right? And we know that that is decreasing as folks age. At 65 years of age, adults become more conservative drivers, but they're still more likely than younger ones to be involved in multi-vehicle crashes, particularly at intersections. At 75, fatalities increase sharply, and older adults are more vulnerable to injury or even death. In terms of community mobility, there are ways that OTs can help older adults to continue driving or to find alternatives. So OTs will first evaluate what's going on with driving and look at things like range of motion and flexibility. And then they will engage with some adaptive approaches, training and compensation, and things like hand controls, wider and larger mirrors, and only driving during the day are examples of adaptation. And then finally, there's ways of maintaining community mobility. So alternatives to driving and participation requirements, such as finding ride shares or shuttles, or finding out if a person can walk to a bus stop, and understanding the range of skills that's needed to take the bus, and understand the schedule and things like that. And then finding resources that either offer transportation services as part of the whole deal, or for example, finding a grocery delivery service. And there's delivery services for many, many things these days. So it is easier for the older adult to not have to drive to get their basic needs met. Still in all, huge change, huge decrease in independence. CarFit was developed by the American Society on Aging in collaboration with AAA, the AARP, which is for retired people and older people, and AOTA. And it's a community program that provides a 12-point checklist of how well the person and the car are working together. So they look at these aspects amongst other things: seatbelt, positioning, neck mobility, steering wheel, and mirror. And you can see on the slide that that an OT is looking for various skills and abilities in each of the areas. So a pretty great program. Next up is money management and retirement. The average age of retirement has steadily risen from 57 to 61. Nearly half of all the baby boomers are still working and say they don't expect to retire until they're 66 or older, and some will say that they will never retire. Generally, we see a trend that people who are in a higher socioeconomic status can retire earlier, obviously, and people who are in lower socioeconomic level are forced to retire much later. Now we'll turn to relationships after retirement. So elders give more than they receive, and there's a growing trend of older adults who own their own homes and continue to be providers and financial support, or providing childcare or acting as caregivers. There's a shrinking of social networks as one ages. People are retiring, they may be moving, they may be unwell, they may have passed away, a whole range of things that cause one's social network to shrink. And older adults look to their adult children for emotional support and have less casual contact with new people or casual friends, right? Sort of like, I need the support and I need the authenticity and the intimacy in a very particular way from my relationships, and so I'm going to look to the familiar. Older people also rely heavily on their spouses for support and social interaction. So marriage in retirement can look a couple different ways. As you can see from this half of the slide, there can be marital dissatisfaction. And what happens basically is that if you had problems in your marriage, they're amplified when you retire because you're around each other so much more. There's also can be greater satisfaction after one retires because there's looser gender roles, so people feel a little bit more free to kind of be who they are and engage how they'd like to. Those with active sex lives report greater satisfaction in life. Sense of humor contributes to that, and playful interactions also contributes to marital satisfaction. So we have kind of two sides of the same coin. Another aspect of the older adult's life and kind of a trajectory is widowhood. And this is a very difficult and disruptive transition. The death of a spouse is considered one of the most difficult things that a person can go through in their entire life. And especially if someone has married early in life, they may have been with their partner for upwards of 40, 50, 60 years, right? So they may need to take on unfamiliar household roles that are unfamiliar or uncomfortable, or they just never learned it because their partner did it. And someone caring for a spouse with a long-term illness can feel a loss of an important role, and also some missing structure that used to happen and now doesn't happen. So there's many stages of grief that happen with widowhood that can happen when the partner becomes ill or disabled, through the caretaking process, decline in function, and then, of course, after death. Now let's look at recreation and leisure. So you would think, get older, retire, go have a great time, right? But the reality is it's difficult for a lot of people to shift from a life of work and a work ethic and being a contributing member of society to being able to engage in and focus on leisure activities. Many people will seek out activities where they're quote unquote needed, like childcare, versus those they enjoy. It can be slow to develop new interests, and prior meaningful interests do continue. So if you liked it when you were younger, you continue to like it and engage with the activity when you're older. Some people can engage in goals that they had, like traveling, that they may not have had time for when they were working. And if one is previously focused, they may have a really hard time taking up new activities. So again, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. And as you're probably seeing, the type of person that you are actually continues into retirement and older adulthood, and it kind of informs who you're going to be when you're retired. So physical activity we know has profound health benefits, but only 29% of people 65 and older are active versus 58% who are sedentary. That's huge, right? So it also presents an opportunity for OT to get in and work on this. And one of the issues that people cite is that they're self-conscious, or people think older adults are supposed to be sedentary, and so they don't want to stand out. There's also plenty of examples of successful aging, and I love this slide and this challenging of stereotypes. So biker who is 67, a athlete who is 84, 95, and then this older individual who is 105 and appears to be on a track and field course, right? So it's not that you necessarily fall apart and die. You can counteract it. It does take support, it does take commitment, and it does take really a persistence to do so. So, successful aging. The effects of exercise and activity are broad, right? Cardiovascular, pulmonary, and neuromuscular systems all benefit from recreational participation in physical activity. The musculoskeletal system also benefits because there's a decreased spinal injury risk. And as we talked about before, more flexibility and mobility, less fear and actual a chance of falling, and increase in bone density. So take a look at the presenter notes for more details on that, but we want to keep our older people active. Housing is the next area that we're going to look at, and currently more than 95% of older people in the U.S. live in community housing settings. 77% own their own homes, and 81% live in single-family homes. So although we hear much about nursing homes and quote-unquote care homes, only a small proportion of the elderly actually live in these settings. So important to remember, and also important to consider this idea of aging in place and OT and other services going to people's natural environment to help them out, rather than necessarily having to go into into nursing homes and skilled nursing facilities. Within retirement communities, this is a place that is designed for older adults who are generally able to care for themselves, but can also have skilled nursing care, shared services, and amenities. And my mother-in-law and her two sisters live in such a retirement community. It's called Rossmore. It's in Walnut Creek in the East Bay of the Bay Area. And it's nice because it's kind of a supported living environment, but they have their own places. They come and go as they please, but there's a lot of activities and support that are also part of that. Retirement communities can be naturally occurring, or they can be built as retirement communities like Rossmore is. I think you have to be over 50 to purchase a place there, a unit there. And it's a great way for older adults to maintain their independence, maintain their activity level, but to have some backup support. There's also continuing care, which are typically age-restricted or age-qualified communities, and they have a variety of services including social, recreational, meal prep, and housekeeping, and a range of levels of housing from independent all the way through nursing care and sometimes through memory care. And actually, my Aunt Rita lives in a continuing care facility. She's got her own kind of like studio-sized apartment, but all her meals are prepared, and there is a lot more kind of support and oversight so that she remains safe and able to care for herself. And she is 87 at this point. All right. And then there are well, we talked about naturally occurring retirement communities. If you'd like to see more about the NORCs, please reference the presenter notes. Next up is the topic of money management. So older adults face a range of financial risks, and life expectancy is later and later, right? Our medical care gets better, and our populations are living older and older. And so being able to plan for how many years you're going to live becomes a really kind of key and also intense issue. One needs to consider age, health status, medical history, etc., and to know how much money to save. So there's no guarantee to the calculation, and often a financial advisor is a good person to help. So sources of income include Social Security, a pension from a job, annuities, savings, and investments that were made earlier in life. Financial risks include lower income, obviously, inflation over the years that one is retired, a volatile stock market, rising medical and caregiver expenses, so the cost of having care is going up, and, as I said, longer life expectancy. As you can imagine, having less money has a negative impact on health. And as we've gone through our various stages of development, we can see throughout the lifespan that lower socioeconomic status is linked with poorer health outcomes, and it's no different in later adulthood. So the quality of one's retirement is very dependent on their assets. Loss of monetary assets can cause health and well-being to tank, and those with limited assets or those that are living alone and disabled, we tend to see depression, loneliness, and sleep problems. So a score of things that result directly from being low income.